Hey guys, I'm back with photosynthesis, and it's going to be just an introduction to it for you. And when we think about photosynthesis, we got to really talk about autotrophs and heterotrophs. Remember, autotrophs are producers. They can be either photoautotrophs, which take their energy from the sun, which is what photosynthesis is going to be dealing with, or they can be chemoautotrophs, which are going to be taken from chemicals. But they basically obtain their organic food without eating other organisms. So they have to take it from their surroundings in some way. Now, heterotrophs is what we are. They're biotic consumers. We obtain our food by eating others, hence the word hetero at the beginning. Now, just to remind you how photosynthesis and cellular respiration are connected, up here under heterotrophs, you can see that we have glucose plus oxygen goes to carbon dioxide and water. So this is us. This is what we do. All right, and autotrophs do the opposite. Carbon dioxide and water. If you notice, these two things are what ended in cellular respiration, and it goes to make glucose and oxygen, which are the two things that we need to go. So you can see how there's a link. I mean, if we heterotrophs need autotrophs and vice versa. All right, so what exactly does it mean to be a plant? First of all, you have to learn how to collect, or you have to need to be able to collect light energy and transfer it into a chemical energy, glucose. You need to be able to store that chemical energy, and you're going to store it in the form of glucose or starch. You need to get building blocks from the environment, the carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, etc. All right, so you're going to need that, and you're going to also be able to produce organic molecules that are needed for growth, such as carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids. Now, when we talk about a plant in this process, chloroplasts are very important because that's where photosynthesis occurs. It contains a pigment, which is chlorophyll, which is green in color. That means it absorbs all the colors of light except for green. It's found in the mesophyll layer of the plant, which, if you look at this diagram over here in the side, you can see the plant, the mesophyll layer is here. All right, it's going to be in the upper part of the plant. Gas exchange, if you thought about the plant, the stomata is where carbon dioxide and water are exchanged. You have these stacks of thylakoids and these spaces in between, which is the stroma. And this is all going to be dealing with photosynthesis and the chloroplast. Okay. Now, when we talk about photosynthesis is basically broken down into two parts: the light reaction and the Calvin cycle. In the olden days, the Calvin cycle was called the Dart reaction, but that's really a misnomer because the Calvin cycle can take place in the presence of light, it just doesn't need it. So let me go through these a little bit. The light reaction means it's light dependent, and the light dependent reaction needs light to go. And as you can see from the diagram, we have light coming in to the light reaction. It takes water and splits it through a process called photolysis and creates oxygen. So oxygen is created here. We're going to need ATP and NADPH are made. Think of NADPH just like the NADs and FADs in the cellular respiration equation. It's an electron carrier. All right. Then you have the Calvin cycle, or the light independent reaction. This is the process that's going to take these ATPs and NADPHs that were created into light dependent reaction. It's going to put on the work, and it's going to convert carbon dioxide to glucose, which is C6H12O6. Sounds like an easy process, huh? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about light reaction first. When we talk about light reaction, we talk about electron transport chain. Now, we just mentioned in cellular respiration about electron transport chain. This one works very similar. This shows that they're related in some way. All right, the ancient organisms were related in some way. If you can remember the endosymbiotic theory about an organism taking in a mitochondria and one taking in a chloroplast, so they are related in some way. And it goes through a process of creating a hydrogen gradient, comes back across the hydrogen pump, and does create ATP. Now, if we look a little bit closer at the electron transport chain, here it is all spelled out. And as you can see, we have water coming in, which releases oxygen, which oxygen is created. All right, and as the electron goes down, it's going to be energized by light in two different parts, photosystem 1 and photosystem 2. It's going to be energized. This energy will later be used to make the ATPs right down here. Okay, And here's the NADPH, which you can see these two end up going to the Calvin cycle. Now, when we talk about how is light actually captured, it's captured by pigments called chlorophyll. Now, these pigments occur in clusters called photosystems, and it's basically, I like to think of like 5-gallon buckets. If they were collecting photons, which are packets of light, they collect them and they pour them one into another until they get a great big storehouse of energy. And when they do that, it energizes an electron. So if you're talking about photosystem, just think it's an area where you have a lot of these clusters of pigments. Okay. Now, when we talk about photosynthesis, there's a lot of different colors of light. You know, everybody should know the Roy G. Biv, right? Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet. These are the colors of the light spectrum. If something's green, that means it absorbs red, orange, and yellow, blue, indigo, and violet, and reflects green. If something is blue, then it absorbs all the other ones and reflects blue, etc. Now, these have different amounts of energy. If you look up here in this diagram, you see these nanometers of wavelengths, 400, 500, 600, 700, different amounts of wavelength. Depending on what color, it depends on what wavelength it is, and different chlorophylls, like chlorophyll A absorbs this wavelength the best, chlorophyll B absorbs this wavelength the best, carotenoids this wavelength. They all absorb different wavelengths better. Now, if you notice, chlorophyll doesn't absorb the green part here, it absorbs both ends, so the nanometers are what makes it. Now, the shorter the nanometer or wavelength, the higher the energy. So remember that. Now, talk a little bit about photosystem. Here's what I was talking about. You can see the photons over here. Photons are just coming from the sun, right? Coming from the sun. They jump from one place to another until they reach a collection place. This is going to be where you have the primary electron acceptor. And this is where the electron is going to get all the energy that all of these different panels collected. Okay? Now, there are two photosystems, photosystem 2 and photosystem 1. Now, photosystem 2 actually comes before photosystem 1, so don't get confused. But photosystem 1 deals with chlorophyll A. Chlorophyll A absorbs 680 nanometers of light. That's about the light spectrum that it does, which is a wavelength of red light. It's called a P680. And then photosystem 1 absorbs a little bit different wavelength of light, 700 nanometers, and it's done by chlorophyll B. A and B are both different ones you need to know. Now, here it is inside the diagram. As you can see, you got photosystem 2 here is going to be absorbing light, and it's going to be chlorophyll A, and photosystem 1 next. It'll be a little bit further down. Okay, now if we talk about how this works, what happens is light hits these little collection chlorophylls, which chlorophyll A, and it absorbs P680. All right, and when it does, it throws off these energized electrons, which are the main acceptors. And these electrons actually come from the splitting of water by light. It's called photolysis. Let me write that down for you. It's called photolysis. Photo means light. Lysis means to split. So it's the splitting of water by the use of light. And when it splits water, you get a release of oxygen. So that's where this part comes out of the light reaction, the oxygen being split. All right, and it also creates hydrogens, which are going to go to the photosystem 2 to be energized. So it sends electrons to this system to be energized. And these hydrogens are actually going to be used a little bit later on in the next step to make NADPHs. Now, if you go to the next process, after these electrons are energized, they go down the electron transport chain, releasing energy, just like before in the cellular respiration. And then you get a re-energizing of the electrons in photosystem 1 by chlorophyll B. Chlorophyll B is 700 nanometers. It re-energizes these electrons, and these electrons then are used to put those hydrogens a while ago onto the NADP, which is carried onto NADPH to the Calvin cycle. So here's the entire cycle together. You get the sun heating up the energy, 2 electrons, splitting of water into photosystem 2, creating oxygen. All right. Then you have all these hydrogen being created, which creates ATP. Then you have the re-energizing of the electrons. You have them making NADPH. So the main thing is ATP and oxygen is made in photosystem 2. NADPH is made in photosystem 1, and both of these products go to the Calvin cycle. Now, the electron transport chain of photosynthesis is very similar to that of cellular respiration. It uses what was produced in the light reaction, uses ATP and NADPH, are going to be made to go to the Calvin cycle. Photosystem 2, realize it's going to have a little bit different chlorophyll than photosystem 1. All right. Now, we say there's two photophosphorylations. There's a non-cyclet and a cyclet phosphorylation. Non-cyclet means it's going to go and it's going to keep going. Cyclet means it's going to come back to us. So in the light reaction, you have basically two steps. Photosystem 2 creates ATP. Photosystem 1 reduces NADPH. In the cyclet, photosystem 1 can't pass electrons to NADP and it has to recycle it. Now, let me show you here what I mean. This is a much better one. If we talk about the non-cyclet, is this pathway. Go from photosystem 1, photosystem 2 to create ATP and NADPHs. Now, if you got the cyclet phosphorylation, photophosphorylation, then it goes in this direction. You get them energized, and then it's going to come back to make ATP by the chemiosmotic process. All right, I know this is fast and furious. I hope it helps you, and I will talk to you tomorrow.